In the beginning, after the music of the Ainur had faded and the vision of Ilvatar had been made real, the world was young and raw and still finding its shape. The Valar had descended into Arda and begun their great labor, raising mountains from the plains, carving valleys for the rivers, filling the vast basins with the waters that would become the seas. The land was warm in some places and cold in others, and the air smelled of stone and water and the electricity of creation. Nothing lived yet. No tree had grown. No flower had bloomed. No creature walked or crawled or swam or flew. The world was empty, but it was not silent. It hummed with the energy of the Valar, the resonance of the music still echoing through the newly formed matter of existence. And somewhere in the heart of what would one day be called Middle-earth, Tom Bombadil was walking. He was already old. He had been old when the Valar first arrived. He had been old when the stars were kindled, when the first mountain thrust its peak toward the sky, when the first raindrop fell from the first cloud and landed in the first ocean. No one knew where he had come from, not the Valar, who had shaped the world, not the Maiar, who served them, not even Manwë, whose eyes could see to the ends of the earth and whose ears could hear every voice that spoke upon it. Tom Bombadil had simply always been there. He was as much a part of Arda as the stone and the water and the sky. He was, perhaps, the first thing that had ever been in the world, or perhaps the thing that had been waiting for the world to arrive. He walked alone. He had always walked alone. He did not mind walking alone. The solitude was not loneliness. The silence was not emptiness. He spoke to the mountains, and the mountains spoke back. He sang to the rivers, and the rivers sang with him. Every stone, every stream, every patch of bare earth was a companion, because Tom Bombadil was the master. And being the master meant that he belonged to everything, and everything belonged to him. But on this particular day, in this particular age, Tom Bombadil came to a river that was different from the other rivers he had known. Part 2. The River That Sang Back. The river was wide and deep and very old. It ran through a forest of trees that had not yet learned to grow leaves, their bare branches reaching toward the sky like the arms of worshippers. The water was clear and cold, and it moved with a purpose that most rivers did not possess. Most rivers simply flowed down from the mountains, across the plains, into the sea, following the path that gravity had laid for them without thought or intention. But this river was different. This river was aware. Tom Bombadil knew it the moment he stepped onto its bank. He had been walking for a long time. He did not measure time in hours or days or years, for those units had no meaning to him. But he had crossed many mountains and many valleys since he had last stopped to rest. He was wearing his blue coat, which was not yet old, but would one day be very old, and his yellow boots, which were already yellow because that was the only color boots could be, and his hat with the feather that bobbed as he walked. He looked at the river, and the river looked back at him. Not literally, of course. Rivers do not have eyes. But there was a presence in the water, a consciousness that pulsed through the current like a heartbeat. Tom Bombadil had encountered many rivers in his long existence, and all of them had been alive in their own way. Rivers are alive in the world that Tolkien made, though they are not alive in the way that men and elves are alive. But none of them had been alive in quite this way. None of them had felt quite so attentive, quite so responsive, quite so ready to answer before the question had been asked. "Hello," said Tom Bombadil. He did not speak loudly because he did not need to. His voice carried into the water like a stone dropping into a still pond, and the ripples spread outward in all directions, touching every part of the river at once. Old Tom Bombadil is walking. Old Tom Bombadil is singing. Old Tom Bombadil has found a river that listens. That is a rare thing. That is a bright thing. The river did not answer in words, but the water stirred. A ripple formed near the bank and spread outward, and as it spread it seemed to gather something, light or warmth or presence, from the deeper currents. The ripple became a swirl. The swirl became a spiral. And out of the spiral, stepping from the water as easily as a mortal might step from a doorway, came a woman. Part 3. The River Daughter. She was golden. That was the first thing Tom Bombadil noticed, and it was the thing that he would remember for all the ages that followed. She was golden in the way that sunlight on water is golden. She was golden in the way that the first autumn leaf is golden, the one that falls before all the others and lands on the surface of a still pond and floats there like a promise. Her hair was the color of river reeds in late summer, when the sun has bleached them to a pale and luminous yellow. Her eyes were green, the green of deep water, the green of the places where the river runs slow and the light filters down from the surface in long, shifting columns. She wore a dress that seemed to be made of water itself, not wet, not dripping, but somehow flowing, moving with a current that had nothing to do with the wind. She was Goldberry. She had always been Goldberry. She would always be Goldberry. But at this moment, in this place, on this bank of this river in the ancient world, before the sun and moon, she had just been born, or just been called, or just been found, depending on how one understood the nature of river spirits. She looked at Tom Bombadil, and Tom Bombadil looked at her, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Not because they were uncertain, not because they were afraid, but because they were recognizing each other. They had never met before. They had known each other forever. "You called," she said. Her voice was the sound of water over smooth stones, the murmur of a stream in summer, the whisper of rain on still leaves. "You sang, and the river heard, and I came." "Who are you, singer on the bank?" Tom Bombadil smiled. It was not a large smile. It was the smile of someone who has found something he did not know he was looking for, and now realizes that he has been looking for it since before he knew what looking meant. "Old Tom Bombadil," he said.
"That is my name. Tom is walking. Tom is singing. Tom has been walking and singing since before the mountains knew their shapes and the rivers knew their paths. And now Tom has found a river that sings back. That is a happy thing. That is a bright thing." Goldberry stepped onto the bank. Her bare feet left no prints in the mud, because the mud recognized her and would not cling to her. She stood before Tom Bombadil, and she was smaller than he was, but there was a weight to her presence that made the air around her feel thick and rich and full of meaning. "I am Goldberry," she said, "the river daughter. I have been in the water since the water was made. I have heard many voices, the voice of the rain, the voice of the wind, the voice of the one who sang the world into being. But I have never heard a voice like yours. You are not of the Valar. You are not of the Maiar. What are you, Tom Bombadil?" Tom Bombadil considered the question.
Not because he did not know the answer, but because the answer could not be put into words, and he knew that Goldberry would understand it anyway. "Tom is," he said. "That is all. Tom is what Tom is. Tom was here before the river. Tom was here before the sea. Tom will be here when the river changes its course and the sea changes its shore. Tom is the eldest. That is not a title. That is what Tom is." Goldberry looked at him for a long time. Then she smiled. A smile that was golden, like everything about her was golden, and she sat down on the bank beside him. Part 4. The Disturbance in the Deep. Ulmo was in the deep places of the world when he felt it. He was always in the deep places, or the high places, or the places where water gathered in quantities so vast that they had no names in any language that would ever be spoken by elves or men.
Ulmo was the Lord of Waters, one of the Aratar, the High Ones of the Valar, the 8 greatest of the powers who had entered Arda at the beginning of time. He was older than the oceans and more powerful than the tides. Every river in the world was his to command. Every lake, every sea, every drop of water that fell as rain or rose as mist or froze as ice, all of it answered to Ulmo. He did not need to be present in all of them at once. He was present in all of them at once, because water was his element, and his being was distributed through every body of water in the world. But something was happening in a river in the heart of the great continent, something that Ulmo had not authorized, something that Ulmo had not commanded, something that was not of him and not of any of his Maiar servants. He felt it as a vibration in the water, a harmonic that did not belong to the music he knew. The river was responding to a voice. Not flowing in obedience to gravity and the shape of the land, as rivers normally flowed. Not being commanded by a Maya of the sea, as the waters of Os and Uinen sometimes commanded the waves. The river was being sung to, and it was answering. Not reluctantly, not under compulsion, but willingly, eagerly, even as though the voice that sang to it was a voice it had been waiting to hear since the moment it was created. Ulmo rose from the deep. He did not rise in physical form. The Valar could take physical form, but Ulmo rarely did, preferring to remain in his element, a presence distributed through the waters of the world. But he gathered his attention, concentrated his awareness, and directed it toward the river where the disturbance was occurring. It was a river in the heart of the continent, a river that he knew well. He had shaped its bed himself in the early days of the world, when the mountains were still settling into their final configurations. He knew every bend and every rapid, and every deep pool where the water slowed and turned in on itself. And he knew that what was happening there now was not something he had ordained. He was not angry. Ulmo was not a being who angered easily. Unlike some of his brethren, unlike Owl, who had been reprimanded for creating the dwarves without permission, unlike Melkor, whose anger had consumed him and turned him into the Dark Lord, Ulmo was patient and deep and slow to judgment. But he was curious, deeply, intensely curious, because there was only one kind of being that could command the waters, and that was a Vala, or a Maya serving a Vala. And the being who was singing to this river was neither. Ulmo decided to investigate. Part 5. The Lord of Waters approaches. Tom Bombadil and Goldberry were sitting on the bank of the river, and Tom Bombadil was singing.
He was singing a song about water and light, and the way that rivers remember the rain that fed them even after the clouds have passed. Goldberry was listening, and she was humming along. Not the words, for Tom Bombadil's songs had no fixed words, but the melody, which was a melody that she recognized from the depths of the river where she had been born. And then the river went still. Not frozen, the water did not turn to ice, and the current did not stop, but the surface of the river became perfectly, absolutely smooth, as though every ripple and every wavelet had been pressed flat by an invisible hand. The sound of the water changed. It became deeper, more resonant, as though the riverbed had suddenly dropped 1,000 feet. The light on the surface changed too, becoming darker and richer, the blue-green of water that is very deep and very old. Tom Bombadil stopped singing. Goldberry stopped humming. They both looked at the river, and the river looked back at them, not with the gentle golden presence of Goldberry, but with something far larger and far older and far more powerful. Ulmo was there. He did not rise from the water in a physical form. He did not need to. His presence filled the river from bank to bank, from surface to bed, from source to mouth. The water itself became his eyes and his ears and his voice. The river was no longer merely a river. It was the Lord of Waters, temporarily localized, temporarily focused, temporarily present in a way that no river had experienced since the earliest days of the world. Tom Bombadil, said Ulmo. Not with his voice. The Valar had voices, but Ulmo's voice would have shattered the trees on the bank and turned the river to steam. He spoke through the water, through the vibrations of the current, through the pressure of the deep. That is what you call yourself, but you are not what you call yourself. You are something else, something older. Something that was here before the waters were gathered into the seas. I felt you command my river. I felt the river answer. No one commands the waters of Arda except me and those who serve me. Who are you? Goldberry had gone very still. She was a spirit of the river, and the river was her home and her being, and the presence of Ulmo in the river was the most overwhelming thing she had ever experienced. She was not afraid. Goldberry was not a creature who experienced fear in the conventional sense, but she was awed, in the way that a candle is awed by the sun. Tom Bombadil was not awed. He stood up from the bank. He straightened his hat, which had tilted slightly during his singing. He looked at the river, at the deep, ancient, powerful presence that had filled it, and he smiled. "Hello," he said. "You are the one who shaped this river. Old Tom Bombadil has walked along many rivers, and he has always known that someone shaped them. The mountains do not shape themselves.
The valleys do not carve themselves. The water flows where it is told to flow, and someone did the telling. That someone is you. Tom is glad to meet you. Tom has been meaning to say thank you for the rivers. They are very fine things. They sing well." There was a pause. It was a very long pause, long enough that the trees on the bank seemed to hold their breath, long enough that the birds in the branches stopped their singing. Ulmo, the Lord of Waters, one of the greatest of the Valar, the being who had shaped the oceans and the rivers and the lakes and the rain, was being thanked for his work by a man in a blue coat and yellow boots. And Ulmo did not know what to say. Part 6. The Question of the Valar. "You are not of the music," Ulmo said at last. His presence had not diminished. He was still filling the river, still pressing against the banks with the weight of all the oceans in the world. But something in his tone had shifted. Not anger, not fear.
Something closer to recognition, or perhaps to the memory of recognition, a fragment of something that had been glimpsed long ago and then forgotten. "When Ilvatar sang the world into being," Ulmo continued, "every note became a thing. The high notes became the stars and the light and the air. The low notes became the earth and the stone and the deep places. The middle notes became the water, my element, my domain, my gift from the One. Everything in Arda is made of the music. Every creature, every stone, every drop of water. But you are not. I can feel it. You are not made of the music. You are made of something else. Something that was here before the music began." Tom Bombadil nodded. He did not seem surprised by this observation. He did not seem surprised by anything. He sat back down on the bank next to Goldberry, and he picked up a fallen leaf. A leaf from a tree that had not yet learned to lose its leaves, but had lost this one anyway. And he turned it over in his hands. "Tom was here before the music," he said. "Not before the music in the way that Ilvatar was before the music. Ilvatar made the music. Tom did not make the music. But Tom was here when the music began. Tom heard the first note. Tom will hear the last note. Tom is what remains when the music is done and the world is unmade, and everything that was made returns to the one who made it. Tom does not know what Tom is. Tom does not need to know. Tom simply is." Ulmo considered this. The Valar were not omniscient. They knew many things. They had shaped the world, after all. and they remembered every moment of its creation. But there were mysteries in Arda that even they did not understand. The fate of men, for instance, which Ilvatar had not revealed to them. The location of the secret fire which burned at the heart of the world and could not be found by any Vala. And now, apparently, the nature of Tom Bombadil, who was older than the music and yet was not Ilvatar, who was in the world but not of the world, who could command the waters without being a Vala or a Maya, who existed outside the hierarchy that had seemed to Ulmo to encompass all of creation. "If you commanded my river," Ulmo said, and his voice was quieter now, less overwhelming, more contemplative, "then you could command all waters, the seas, the lakes, the rain, the ice, everything that I have shaped and governed since the world began. You could take my element from me. Why do you not?" Tom Bombadil laughed. It was a bright laugh, a laugh like water over stones. And Goldberry, who had been sitting very still and very quiet, smiled at the sound of it. "Why would Tom do that?" he said. "Tom does not want to command the waters. Tom does not want to command anything."
Commanding is a heavy thing. It is a tired thing. The one who commands must always be watching. He must always be guiding. He must always be worrying about whether his commands are being obeyed. Tom does not worry. Tom has never worried. Tom will never worry. You, Lord of Waters, you command the seas and the rivers and the rain. That is your gift. That is your song. Tom would not take your song from you. Tom has his own song. He stood up again and walked to the edge of the river. The water was still perfectly smooth, still filled with the presence of Ulmo, still dark and deep and ancient. Tom Bombadil bent down and dipped his hand into the water. The water, which had been still a moment before, rippled around his fingers like a living thing. "Besides," he said, "the water likes you. It told me so. It remembers when you shaped its first channel. It remembers when you taught it to flow. It is grateful." Old Tom Bombadil listens to the water, and the water is grateful to Ulmo. That is a fine thing. That is a rare thing. The Lord of Waters is loved by the waters. Tom will not interfere with that. Part 7. The Understanding. Ulmo was silent for a long time. The river flowed around Tom Bombadil's hand, and the presence of the Vala did not diminish, but it changed. It became less overwhelming, less probing, more accepting. The weight of the deep ocean receded, and what remained was something closer to curiosity. The curiosity of a being who had thought he understood the world and had just discovered that the world was larger than he had imagined. "You are not a threat," Ulmo said. It was not a question. Tom Bombadil shook his head. "You are not a rival. You are not a usurper. You are not here to challenge my dominion or disrupt my works. You are simply here, as you have always been here, as you will always be here." Tom Bombadil nodded. "Then I will leave you to your song," Ulmo said, "and I will leave the river to its daughter. She is yours, I think. Not in the way that possessions are owned, in the way that rivers and their banks belong to each other. She has been waiting for you, though she did not know it, and you have been walking toward her, though you did not know that either." Goldberry looked up. Her green eyes met the surface of the river, and for a moment she and Ulmo were in communion. The Lord of Waters and the River Spirit, the Vala and the daughter of his element. No words were spoken because no words were needed. Ulmo acknowledged her. He released her. He gave her, in the way that the sea gives its rivers to the land, into the care of the strange being who had called her from the water. Then Ulmo was gone. The river was a river again, still deep, still ancient, still conscious in its own way, but no longer filled with the overwhelming presence of one of the powers of the world. The surface rippled back into its normal patterns. The sound of the current returned to its usual pitch. The light on the water returned to its usual brightness. Tom Bombadil withdrew his hand from the river and sat back down on the bank. Goldberry was still there beside him. She had not returned to the water.
She would never return to the water, not permanently, not in the way she had been there before. She had been called, she had answered, and she had chosen. "Well," said Tom Bombadil, "that was a very large visitor." Old Tom Bombadil does not often have visitors, but this one was polite. This one asked questions and listened to the answers. That is a good quality in a Lord of Waters. Goldberry laughed. It was the first time she had laughed since Ulmo had appeared, and the sound of it was like rain on the river, bright and clean and full of life. "He was afraid of you," she said. "Not afraid in the way that small things are afraid of large things. Afraid in the way that old things are afraid of older things. He did not know what you were. He still does not know. But he knows that you are not his enemy. And he knows that you are not his subject. And that is enough." Tom Bombadil nodded. He was still holding the leaf he had picked up earlier. It was a very ordinary leaf, brown and dry and slightly curled at the edges. He placed it on the surface of the river, and the current carried it away. "Tom is no one's enemy," he said. "Tom is no one's subject. Tom is Tom. And now Tom has Goldberry. That is a happy thing. That is the happiest thing that has ever happened to old Tom Bombadil." He stood up and offered her his hand. She took it. Her hand was cool and smooth, like river stones, and his hand was warm and steady, like sun-warmed earth. They stood together on the bank of the river, the master and the river daughter, the eldest and the golden, the two beings in all of Arda who belonged to no one but each other. "Come," said Tom Bombadil. "Old Tom Bombadil has a house. It is not much of a house. It is a small house. It is a happy house. It has a door that is always open, and a garden that is always blooming, and a roof that keeps out the rain when the rain does not want to come in. Goldberry will like the house. The house will like Goldberry." They walked away from the river into the forest that would one day be called the Old Forest. The trees bent their branches as they passed, not in submission, but in greeting. The birds who had fled when Ulmo appeared returned to their branches and began to sing. The river flowed on behind them, carrying its memories and its secrets and its gratitude to the Lord of Waters who had shaped its bed and the strange old man who had sung it a song. And in the deep places of the world, Ulmo watched them go. He did not understand Tom Bombadil. He would never understand Tom Bombadil. But he understood that the world was larger than he had thought, and that there were forces in it that even the Valar could not command. And that, he decided, was as it should be. The music of Ilúvatar was vast and complex, and full of harmonies that even the Ainur could not fully perceive. Tom Bombadil was one of those harmonies. Goldberry was another. Their meeting, their union, the life they would build together in the forest by the river, all of it was part of the music, woven into the fabric of creation from the first note to the last. Ulmo returned to the deep. The river flowed. The forest grew. And Tom Bombadil and Goldberry walked home together, hand in hand, singing a song that was very old and very new. A song about water and earth and the way that two things that were always meant to be together will find each other, no matter how long it takes.